session is starting to record there now. So just a quick first question, and then I will get back to everyone else's questions as we go. But so Emily asks that she wants to plant zucchini and pumpkin, but doesn't have a whole lot of ground space. Any advice for training these plants to vine up? Zucchini is a bush plant, so you're not going to be able to train your zucchini to vine up. Your pumpkin, however, depends on which variety you choose. The larger jack-o'-lantern type pumpkins, Connecticut Field is one of the ones that we sell at the farm. They're going to be too large to vine up without providing some support. I have seen people post that they've had hammocks built for their pumpkins, so they will vine up. But the problem is supporting your squash once it is up there, climbing on something. And that might even look like pantyhose. That's the one that I've seen. But your zucchini is a bush plant, so that's not going to vine anyway, unless there are zucchini varieties that I'm not aware of. But most zucchini varieties are bush. All right, let's see how many we've got registered coming in there now. So we're up to 154. Welcome, everyone. So again, just letting everyone know there is a Q&A on the side there. You can enter your questions at any time, but I'm going to go through the presentation there now and come back to the questions. Maybe I'll even answer them as we go. So hopefully you can all see my screen here. And okay, so planting your garden. I found this just one of the resource blogs I tagged for this. They talked about planting as part folklore and part science, and I thought that was too true. So as we go through this, keep in mind that I don't necessarily know everything. I'm just here to share the knowledge that I do have, and it's very much possible that what you've experienced or what you've been told is different and maybe even still accurate. Maybe there's a lot of possibilities out there in the world of planting. And I don't have a degree in this, not in agriculture. Got different degrees, but not this one. So we're going to go through plant spacing, successive planting, companion plants, crop rotation, and then back to some more questions and answers. So I am the current chair of the CBS Community Garden. It was actually started in 2019, so we're only 1 year old. You can see my shirt here. It started when the town of CBS held a public consultation, and we had another one only in the end of February before everything shut down. You can actually see that public consult on Facebook still if you want a nice review of what we've been up to over the past year and our plans for the future. Gateway Garden is up behind the new arena on Legion Road. That's our large garden. It has communal beds and leased beds. So you can join us twice a week over the summer to get your gardening fix in with the communal beds. And every year we do a lottery for some leased beds as well, about half and half this year. And we have a lot of community events. So this was actually planned as a in-person workshop. And of course, this year being what it is, we're doing all of these webinars instead. So we'll see how that goes in terms of our future events. But last year we did have a large harvest fest, a pumpkin stroll, and lots more events happening. It's a very energetic group, and we hope that you will be able to join us again in the future, whether for webinars or in person. And we are looking for more neighborhood gardens and champions for neighborhood gardens. So if you want half a dozen raised beds at the end of your cul-de-sac, then get in contact with us. The email and the Facebook group is on the left-hand side of the screen there. And I'll have that up at the end of the presentation as well. And we have already had some webinars to date, so this is just, I wanted to let you know. As I said, I won't be able to answer every question, but some of the questions have already been answered in these workshops. So seed starting, building soil for plant health, and seed saving were all done through the CBS Community Garden. And we also had nutrition for mental health only 2 days ago with the town of CBS and Amanda Mews of Concept Nutrition. So shout out to that webinar as well, as she is on our steering committee. A quick look at the events. Like I said, we're a busy, energetic group, and so we're hoping to do another webinar next month on helpers and pests, how to attract good bugs and keep out the bad ones. These are all a little subject to change until we, firm up our presenters, and then as the year goes on, whether we are able to have a harvest fest is dependent on the whole population of Newfoundland and Labrador keeping their bubbles safe. So hopefully we'll be able to get together soon and have in-person events. The CBS Community Garden and all community gardens are actually deemed essential services. So we will be gardening this summer, just to let everyone know. And we do have policies and procedures in place to follow. So we're still working through them, but by the time we open, they'll be in place and sent out to all of our members. Okay. And second hat is the farm, or the Foxtrap Access Road Market, is actually my business. I work with my father, James, and you can visit our website there, the foxtrapaccessroadmarket.ca, to order seed potato, seedlings, plants, tomato baskets, and eventually you'll also be able to order produce as it becomes available. So bookmark our website, and hopefully we get to meet that way through picking up seedlings or produce throughout the year. You can email us or join us on Facebook as well. Up in the corner, I just have our little mission statement, and I do believe in it. Every neighborhood deserves a farm, because the ability to meet your farmer, hello, and see the land on which they grow their vegetables causes a fundamental shift in how we live in this place. So join us and grow with us. All right, so that is the farm, and we'll get right into it now. So plant spacing is our first topic. I wanted to start with what, at least at the farm, we either direct sow or we transplant. So we transplant as much as we can for a number of reasons, but there are certain things, as I've labeled out here, that don't take well to transplanting. It's not always impossible. Beets, radish, and peas, for example, could all be transplanted. They just it's either not necessary or they don't take as well to it. The reason why we do transplant is that it lengthens your season, so you're getting a start on it earlier in the spring than you would be able to direct sow. But we're also avoiding as much weeding as we can, so we can clear out the land of any weeds before we put in our transplant. And our transplant is 3 or 4 inches tall when there's no weeds. So when the weeds come, you can easily tell the difference between the tiny little weeds and the 4-inch plant. Versus when you're direct sowing, you're trying to figure out whether this little plant is a weed, or you're your produce, trying to pick between which is which. And when you're familiar with it and certain plants, it's a little easier to tell the difference, but super easy when you're looking at a 3 or 4 inch transplant versus a tiny weed. Yeah, so that's just a quick little table of what we generally direct sow versus transplant. In terms of like carrot and parsnip, they can't be transplanted. They are a root, and when you transplant, the root gets separated and it spiders out, so it's not viable to transplant. Okay. Now this, I wanted to review kind of traditional spacing that you see on your seed package versus square foot gardening. And the top little garden, the 3x7, is what a square foot garden might look like, versus the exact same plants are down below in traditional spacing, and they take up, instead of 21 square feet, which is the size of the raised beds up at Gateway, is 7x3 or 21 square feet. The traditional spacing without trenches even are taking up 68 square feet. Now, I don't mean this to say that square foot gardening is actually the answer, because I actually want to point out what difference this is. This image comes from the Farmer's Almanac Garden Planner, and I do recommend using some website tools. There's a lot of information out there to help you, but square foot gardening, or at least the square foot gardening that this website recommends in terms of its spacing, is a little too good to be true. But as we go through this presentation, I don't want to take all hope away from you that you can't have a plentiful garden. Just that square foot might not be the miracle that you're hoping for. One of the things with square foot is that you might not get your produce to the full size. So, for example, if you're planting your cabbages, one of the ones is cabbages in there with 4 to a square foot, they're going to grow, but they're going to be small. Or your lettuces, you're going to be talking about microgreens when you're planting 9 plants in a square foot where there should be only 1. So it's not that it won't grow, it's just not going to grow to the full maturity that it could, given the whole space that it needs. And some of them will actually prematurely bolt. So bolting is what we say when it goes to seed. And some things we want to go to seed, things that you want to flower and go to seed, are your fruits, your tomato, your zucchini, your squash. Those are all things you want to bolt, but you don't want your kale to bolt, or your cauliflower, any of those that you actually want to eat it before it bolts. Your broccoli is a big one that often bolts. And given the extreme small space of square foot gardening, they get stressed and will bolt more quickly. And heat also causes it to bolt, not just space. Okay. So this is part of the folklore. I always learned that the last frost date was the first full moon in June. And that this year, the first full moon in June is June 5th, which is not very far away at all. This was completely true last year. The last frost date of 2019 was the first full moon in June. That was actually June 27th, though, so it was very, very separate. Some other people do say it's Father's Day that you go by, and I'm not going to Father's Day is certainly a safer date. It was only 2 or 3 years ago, though, that our last frost was weeks before the first full moon in June, because it was by Mother's Day. So we look at average frost dates over time and try to plan, and when things go wrong, you cover your crops. So just a quick, if you do expect frost, you can put a bed sheet out over your crops that you've planted, and you can water first thing in the morning. So you're going to water the frost off of your plants if at all possible, if you're up early, and notice it. So that's the last frost date. First frost date this year by the Farmer's Almanac says October 7th, is again by averages. Last year, the first frost date, however, was September 9th, which was pretty devastating to my tomatoes and zucchinis. That was a really early end to the season, but October 7th is a little more regular for, I should say, I'm on the Avalon of Newfoundland and Labrador. So, of course, in different areas, these dates are going to vary. If you're certainly inland and central, or you're up north, then you need to find out some local dates for yourselves. But here on the Avalon, these are the dates that I'm going by. This gives us a 120-day growing season. I'm just going to look into zucchini there now. Yeah, sorry. For that last slide too, I meant to mention, talk to your local farmers. There's growers everywhere, there's community gardens everywhere, and there are farmers just about everywhere. So ask them when they're planting certain crops, if you're away from this, away from the Avalon. Okay, so zucchini, I wanted to bring this one up as an example. So this is the traditional spacing that zucchini needs. It's a 24-inch spacing. So in the 7x3 or 21 square feet squared raised bed, you're looking at only 5 zucchini plants. Now, I don't know how much you like zucchini, but I'm betting you don't want to only plant zucchini, and that's where this comes in. So zucchini, importantly, you plant out 2 to 3 weeks after your last frost date. So based on the dates I just told you for the Avalon, that's looking at June 20th to 27th. Why is that important? Well, next we're going to look at cabbage, and the zucchini is going to make sense. So this Tierra cabbage in particular, and there are different varieties of cabbage, so I don't want you to just blend all the cabbages together, but this is an extra early cabbage. It only needs 12 inches or 1 foot of spacing, 1 foot square. So in that same raised bed, you're going to have 21 cabbages. Now, these cabbages, you're going to plant out 2 weeks before the last frost date. So you're planting these out May 22nd, which is only next week. With a 45-day maturity, you're harvesting these 21 cabbages on July 6th. Let's pull this all together there now. So if you had 21 cabbages harvested on July 6th, you're going to eat a cabbage every day for 3 weeks. That's a lot of cabbage. And I don't think anyone generally eats a cabbage a day. And now these are only 1 to 2 pound cabbage. They're small, but that's a lot of coleslaw to eat. But with a 45-day maturity, planting 2 weeks before last frost date, you can actually vary these so that you're just planting 1 cabbage every week until August 23rd. And now you're getting 14 cabbages, but only one a week. And why I bring this up, why I'm talking to you about these cabbage, is that with this maturity rate, if we go back, the 45-day maturity, and you're looking at a harvest July 6th, you're actually going to be harvesting your cabbage 1 week after you're planting your zucchini. So your zucchini, while it needs a 2-foot spacing, needs that spacing at full maturity. So in between where you're going to plant your zucchini, you can actually be surrounding each zucchini plant with 4 cabbages easily. And now you might not want to plant all 4 cabbages at once, like we just explored. You need to be able to leave space in order to have a successive planting plan. So that's what we're talking about. The intensive plant, the intensive plan means that you're accounting for when one plant gets put in earlier than another and harvested earlier than another. Another common example of this is radishes. Radishes have a 21-day maturity, so you can even among your cabbages, so you have your zucchini, where your zucchini plant will go, you have 4 cabbages out around it in a you're talking about only 1-foot square here, 1 zucchini and 4 cabbages there. In between all of where the cabbages are, you could be surrounding them with radish, because you're pulling your radish at 21 days and your cabbage at 45 days, and your zucchini is barely getting planted when all of this is already taken out. So that's what we mean by intensive planting, and successive planting is when you realize that maybe you don't need 50 radishes all at once, and you're going to scatter when you actually plant your radish seed as well. Hopefully that's making sense. Maybe I should pop over to the questions to see how we're doing, and you can ask any questions at any time, and I'll get to them at the end, if not before. Let's see. So the one question they're asking whether it's too early for broccoli seedlings. We actually have broccoli seedlings are 1 week before, so we're actually 2 weeks out now. Technically, you would be waiting for another week, but if you're willing to cover them and protect them if and when frost comes, like I talked about, putting a bed sheet out over them. You can also put a upside down container of any sort. You're just trying to keep the frost off of them, and I'd recommend not planting them the day before frost. So you would try to you'd try to plant it when that evening is going to be nice. Planting root veggies now. Usually we do, you could plant by seed now for any root veggies. Usually you wait until June for your carrots. Right now we're just waiting for the ground to dry up to get our potatoes in. If the ground is too wet for potatoes, they'll rot in place. Keeping your pets away. We'll deal with pests in a moment. I'm not sure I have too many tricks for actual pets, but we'll see. Someone saying they still got snow on the ground. I feel sorry for you. I haven't seen snow in a long time in CBS. Even St. John's has been a little worse than here, but I don't think they have snow now. When you talk about turnip, we do both for turnip, both seedlings and seeds. Yeah. Yeah, you can do both for turnip because they're fairly quick to come up, but as I talked about the seedlings and trying to avoid weeds is a good reason to do seedlings. Seeds we tend to do later in the season. Another benefit of doing seedlings is that you know that your plant is up and living versus your seeds. You don't know if they're living or not until a few weeks later, and then you're looking at replanting and starting from the beginning. We're going to deal with cabbage moths. Review the number of radishes for successive planting. Yeah, so radishes really only take up, you give them an inch between each seed. So it's your decision how many radishes you want at any given time. When you're looking at having a bunch of radish, it's usually maybe 6 to 12 radish. So if you put in your 12 seeds this week, give it a week, put in another 12 seeds. That means at the end of 3 weeks, if you keep adding, you'll have 12 radishes a week for every week that you continue to plant your 12 seeds. Hardening off your broccoli seedlings. You can start hardening them off during the days now. So you harden off not just for the cold, but also for the sun. Your plants can become sunburnt. So you start with putting them out for a few hours at a time until they get out all day long over the process of up to a week, and certainly as the week goes on, you might consider leaving them out overnight, especially if you're looking at a nice night. You don't want to put them out on a frost night still in their seed trays. And someone just saying they're late, don't worry about it. You can actually review this whole webinar afterwards as well. So if you want to go back to the beginning, we will be posting this whole webinar on our Facebook group afterwards. So, okay, so I didn't get everyone's question, but I am going to get back to the slides, and we will go back again to the questions. So keep them coming. So this was just the successive planting we were talking about. Again, you just have to decide for yourself how many cabbages you want. And these particular Tierra cabbages, like I said, are only 1 to 2 pounds each. Their beauty is that they are only 45 days, and that is half the amount of time than some cabbages, maybe even a third. We also have grown OS cross cabbages. If you want to grow a record size cabbage, grow OS cross. They are massive, but they also take 120 days. And in 120 days, someone had asked about cabbage moth, and for that matter, slugs, you're dealing with that many more days of pests. So this 45-day cabbage, while small, has a whole lot less time to be bothered by pests. And you could just plant 2 if you think that a 2-pound cabbage is not big enough for your jigs dinner. In 45 days time, and July 6th, then plant 2. And that's what we mean by successive planting, is thinking about how much I want to harvest and when. And I have this little chart. I'm actually going to bring you over to the website for this, but just a quick look. Days to maturity. When you're looking at seed packages or when you're buying seedlings, this is something to consider for exactly what we've been discussing. So on that note, I'm just going to bring you over. So this is my website. We only launched it in the middle of April, and you can do all of your pre-ordering for seedlings and seed potatoes on it. But why I'm bringing you there now is right up at the top here, tips for growing. I'm still adding to this blog, of course, and I'm going to try to add quite a bit of information. This webinar will go up on it. But right at the top for now is quick reference guide for transplanting seedlings, and these are all the seedlings that we actually have for sale on our website, and you can see the information that I've just been telling you. There's just kind of seed package information, days to maturity, how many plants go in a square foot, the diameter in inches. So like you're saying, the broccoli needs up to 24 inches. When you plant your broccoli a little closer, they're just not going to get as big. So if you need to squeeze it into an 18-inch space instead of 24, it's still going to live. It's just maybe a little smaller. And then the transplant date, and that's, again, last frost date is LFD, if you're wondering what that acronym is. So that's the website. It's the Foxtrap Access Road Market.ca. And I do have a few more up here about how to choose your seed potatoes. So we have Elite 2 seed potatoes up for sale there now. And Elite 2 being basically laboratory grown seed potatoes. So they're more likely to be disease-free than the potatoes that you sow from last year. And then there's some tomato tips and tricks as well, as we sell a lot of tomatoes. The next one that I'm going to be putting up is basil. A lot of people have trouble growing basil. It is the most finicky herb, but hopefully with a few tips and tricks, you'll be growing your own pesto in no time. Okay, so for now, we'll go back to here. And I do have listed here a few other things. Hakurei turnip, or sometimes called Market Express turnip, is usually, I think up to now I've been saying turnip, but meaning rutabaga, or your Newfoundland turnip, but these are actually like not much bigger than a radish. They're a nice quick crop as well to be putting in amongst your other things while they're growing. So really great for your intensive gardening. The choy we have up as seedlings. That is also a very quick choy. Sometimes bok choy can be up to, I believe, 75 days. But this one is smaller. Usually when you're looking at quick crops, they are smaller in size. But it is that quick turnaround that we're prioritizing here. As like I said, you can do more intensive things with quick crops, and also you're avoiding a lengthy invasion by pests by doing these things. Tokyo Bacana is actually quite a large crop, or it can be. Some people will harvest it as smaller leaves that you eat right away, but it's actually quite a large choy type mustard plant. So that one's nice in that it is a big but quick crop. Okay, next slide. So now we're into companion plants. So when you're doing intensive planting, it's also important to know what plants are going to work well together and what plants aren't. And this also gets into attracting pollinators and predatory insects, so that the predatory insects are actually going to eat your pests, or straight up deterring your pests, and or sacrificing for the greater good. So we had pill bugs or carpenters infestation in our strawberries a few years back, and what we did was take a rutabaga or Newfoundland turnip. We actually sliced it up and put it in the corners of the strawberry bed, and the carpenters actually prefer the rutabaga to the strawberries, and went for that instead. Of course, our strawberries also have netting over it for the birds and squirrels. So yeah, sometimes multiple pests for the same crop. Potato for wireworm is another sacrificial crop. In terms of this, again, is you're actually going to take a potato, cut it up and peel it, put a marker in where you're going to put your potato and bury your potato so that you can find it afterwards, and it's actually a trap for a wireworm. And often this is not going to work in a big open field. At best, in a big open field, this is going to give you an idea of how heavy your wireworm infestation is. But this does work well if you're in raised beds or you are growing in greenhouses in some sort of container. So sometimes wireworms can come in the compost or in the manure that you're adding to your raised beds. And doing these little potato traps, or you can also do oatmeal traps for wireworms, will actually get rid of hopefully, the wireworms in that small raised bed or container. One of the ones I learned in researching for this webinar was actually that leaf miners prefer radish leaves over spinach and Swiss chard. Leaf miners don't actually detrimentally harm your crop. It just makes it not look so appealing. So you can eat spinach that has leaf miner holes in it. It just doesn't look as pretty. You can also eat radish leaves though, so that's up to you whether which one is more important, and which one you're gonna prioritize. But otherwise, I've went around crushing leaf miner eggs every 3 or 4 days until they're gone. And you do want to catch pests early, so things like leaf miners will have multiple generations. You want to try to get your first generation killed before the second one is as large as the first. Back up to attracting pollinators and predatory insects. Often they're the same thing. So we're looking at hoverflies and wasps and of course bees. Basically any herbs will do this trick. Any herbs or any flowers. Usually flowers that are smaller are what you're looking for. So your sweet alyssum are quite small flowers to attract these insects. And in terms of deterring pests, certain things like your onion family will actually deter slugs, which is important in your lettuce garden. So while you might not, really care about growing onions and leek, you could be interplanting them with your lettuce in order to protect your lettuce from slugs, or your cabbages for that matter. And the onion family actually works for a lot of different pests. So just a side note, in goodness, the name's gone from me. In Outlander, Claire in Outlander is told at one point by a nun to make sure that she separates out the garlic and saves some for the garden to plant in between other plants all throughout the garden. So just a fun little fact there, but it is a great idea because many pests hate garlic and onions and leek and that whole family, chives included there as well. And they only take up so much space. Like an onion only needs 4-inch spacing, so you can really be putting in your onions here and there and everywhere. They're also good for, that whole family is good for getting or deterring your cabbage loopers, which is your cabbage moth, that little white butterfly and green caterpillar, rust fly, and even rabbits. Rhubarb works well as a border. So some people will plant rhubarb on the edge of their garden, and it's just that the slugs won't come in over it. Diamondback moths are similar to a cabbage looper. They have a quicker turnaround time, but tomatoes actually deter them. And another one for wireworms is actually mustard. So mustard, brown mustard this is spicy, and wireworms don't actually like the spice of the roots of mustard, so they kind of run away from it. This is not going to solve your problems this year for wireworm, but if you do have wireworm and you're hoping to grow potatoes without wireworm holes, you could do mustard as a cover crop this year, and next year you'll have fewer wireworms. The more years you do this, of course, the better your chances. The other thing, though, is that you will now have mustard as a weed in your garden. You'll never quite get rid of mustard, but it is a tasty weed. So there's that. Some other things to know on companion plants. Pals and frenemies. Fennel is actually your universal enemy. It stunts the growth of most plants, but it does repel aphids. So you might, if you are a fennel lover, you might choose to put your fennel in a separate container, a separate raised bed of some sort, to keep it around so that you're repelling aphids, but also not stunting the growth of the plants around it. So it's certainly not something you want to put in an intensive garden. Someone asked about getting your pumpkins to trail. Don't use sunflowers and corns with your pumpkins. I speak from experience. So there's back to some more folklore. There's a story that goes around about the three sisters, and that is corn, beans, and squashes, and that they all grow great together. And I'm all for the beans and corn. That works really well, and in sunflowers and peas as well. So the peas or beans will actually use sunflowers and corn as a trellis to climb up, which is wonderful. The squash are supposed to be a weed cover because they have these big leaves that prevent weeds from growing, which is a great theory, and it does work. However, your heavy squashes like your pumpkins and like your spaghetti squash are actually going to weigh down your corn and your sunflowers. So I do not recommend the Three Sisters. At best, in the Three Sisters, use a summer squash like a zucchini or a white vegetable marrow. Do not use a winter squash, or a non-bush squash, I should say, because there are some new hybrid bush winter squashes. Anyway, so some logistical things to think about there. And then some more pals, radishes and carrots. So I talked about radishes being really quick. Carrots are actually quite slow to grow. So planting them even at the same time can yield great results because they're from different plant families is another important thing. And we are going to get into crop rotation as well, which is another important part of especially intensive gardens. All gardens, but certainly intensive gardens. And yeah, radishes are growing on the surface versus carrots are quite deep. And by picking the radishes, you're loosening your soil as well for your carrots to actually get up to size if your soil is dense. Some more logistical things to think about when you're intensive planting and your companions. So your squashes, many squashes at least, and cucumbers trail on the ground if you don't give them anything to climb. Just be wary of what you're planting that next to. If you intend to hill up your potatoes, for example, that's not going to work with squash vines in between your potato plants. So just some logistical things to think about at all times, not just those. There's too many to mention, but you need to be thinking through these problems. Corn and sunflowers, for that matter, while they're creating that nice fencing for your peas and beans. Sometimes even cucumbers can climb up your corn or sunflowers if you choose a small cucumber variety, not too much of a heavy one. They are creating shade in the immediate vicinity, so this is perfect if you want to grow spinach, arugula, lettuce, any of these crops that bolt in the heat of the sun. Would be great to plant it immediately next to corn. But don't plant your tomatoes or other sun-loving crops in the shade that will be, because it's easy to forget these things when your corn is, a couple inches tall. And yes, you can grow corn in Newfoundland. You need to get it in early, and you need to provide it with lots of manure and heat. And that's a whole nother slide that I'm not going to touch on, actually, but you can grow corn, okay? You can grow a lot of things if you just think it through and give it everything that it needs. Okay, time for a little drink of water and maybe to have a quick look at questions. Any room left in your community garden? So I don't believe we have any leased beds left. However, two things to talk about here is we do communal gardens as well. So we actually have some things that are perennial planted in terms of herbs are up there. That's just a communal thing, as well as rhubarb. We're going to get into some raspberry plants, hopefully a snap pea fence. So those things you can come up twice a week and garden with us. And at the end of the evening, after doing some garden chores, you go home with vegetables. And a lot of people don't believe us when we say that, but most people end up trying to say, no, I don't need that head of lettuce or whatever it is. That's okay, leave it for someone else. But we end up trying to like force it into your hand, because it's the people who are there that go home with the crops, and you will if you show up. So that's a communal. We have 15 communal beds and 15 leased beds up at Gateway off Legion Road. We're also looking for champions for neighborhood gardens. So if that's something that you're intrigued about, we have a lot of resources, a lot of energy. So if you want to be a champion for putting 6 raised beds at the end of your cul-de-sac, only for your immediate neighborhood, we're not talking about letting people from 20 minutes down the road come garden or have any events in your neighborhood. It's just for you and your immediate neighbors. If you want to be that champion, then reach out to us, and we have the resources to help you put a neighborhood garden in there. So hopefully that answers your question. And otherwise, we do a lottery annually, this being only the first year we've done it, but a lottery for the leased beds. And as we continue to grow, there'll be more beds put in, but this is only our second year, and we're looking at 30 beds in total right now. How high should your corn be before it is useful as a trellis for peas? So peas do grow faster than corn. You can have your peas in the ground. If I'm not mistaken, I believe peas can be in the ground basically now, versus corn you're not putting in until probably 2 weeks after last frost, if you're not giving it a mulch around it. Yeah, a lot of ifs around corn. But I would say I would want corn to be maybe 4 inches tall before I plant the peas next to it, because the peas will catch up for sure. Are marigolds good for planting between crops? Absolutely. Marigolds are good pest deterrent. Actually, someone asked about pets earlier. They say that marigolds are good for cats. I feel like that's a bit of folklore that I'm not positive I believe in. Maybe some cats and not others, but worth a try if cats are a problem. But yeah, it's great to be thinking about putting marigolds, and marigolds are edible, by the way. But putting any flowers in between your plants in order to attract your beneficial insects and deter your pests. Lots of good ideas for flowers that you can eat. The list I had up earlier were all edible flowers, and usually you're using those in salads. But maybe there's, you can have lavender jelly or lilac ice cream as well. So lots of interesting recipes out there if you're willing to be a bit adventurous. I believe, yeah. Yeah, my partner is actually here with me, and he's just asking as well whether it's all varieties of marigolds that are edible. And as far as I know, it's all varieties of marigolds. But that is a good question. Not all flowers are edible. Petunias are a good example of that. There are some edible varieties of petunias, but not all petunias are edible. But I believe that all marigolds are edible. Oh, someone's saying that garlic will deter cats. Yeah, I bet. Anything strong smelling like that will probably deter cats. Just looking back up to the top because I'm sure I skipped questions. Touch on the best. Oh, shoot. Mix of soil for raised beds, is it? Every time? Okay. Mix of soil best for veggies in containers. Yeah, so you need a loose soil. I'd really recommend watching Tom Loader's video on soil for that. You need a, goodness, I'd have to look it up, but there's a, yeah, I'm not even quite sure, but especially for containers, you want things like perlite in your containers just to have the lightness that doesn't weigh down as it rains. Sometimes your containers and the soil in it can just get too heavy for crops to propagate correctly or well, especially if you're looking at root crops in containers. So make sure that it's light. I'm sorry, I can't give you more than that right now. Is it too late to start seed? No, it is not too late to start seed. As we kind of went through, a lot of things are you just plant as you need it. So it might be too late to plant. Goodness, it'd be too late to plant probably peppers unless you're ready to go with grow lights in the fall. But things like your cabbages, especially if you're choosing the right varieties. So it's really important to choose varieties that fit within your window. You could definitely start, I'd say most everything you could still start from seed, given the right things. So you're not going to start your 120-day cabbage, but you are going to start your 45-day cabbage, or Your tomatoes, you could maybe start them now. I would probably veer towards getting tomato transplants at this point. And a lot of herbs take a long time as well, so I'd veer towards herb transplants. But yeah, other things you're just going to get a little later for planting a little later, especially the one-offs like your turnip or your rutabaga. Once you harvest your rutabaga, that's your only rutabaga. So you're not going to worry that that's a couple weeks later, but maybe you'll worry a little bit about your tomato because it's a continuous crop where you're not harvesting your whole tomato plant at once. So you want to get that in as quick as possible. I hope that answers it. Someone asking how to view the past webinars. So you can actually look at the CBS Community Garden Network group on Facebook, and I'll put up that information at the end as well. And they're all there as videos on our page. Live I don't know about strawberry plants. I'm sorry. I feel like it's too early for strawberries. But I very much stand to be corrected on that one. Again, question on whether it's too late to do direct sow. It just depends on what you're hoping to accomplish. Yeah. And how soon you want it. Yeah, someone has some folklore about crushed egg shells, whether that is good to keep cats off the garden. Does this work? I don't think you'd keep my cat off the garden. She was just here a second ago. Depends on the cat. I think the marigolds and the garlic are your better bet than eggshells, and you hear eggshells for slugs as well. Eggshells are a good source of calcium, and they're good for your soil. You should crush them up and put them in your soil. Don't expect them to help with pests other than you're creating healthy soil, which is a whole ecosystem approach to getting predatory insects to eat your pests. Can celery go in the greenhouse? Oh, that's a good question. I might try that. I'm not sure. Celery is cold hardy. If it gets cold too early, it will bolt. So it's a opposite thing. Cauliflower does it as well. If cauliflower gets cold when it's small and celery gets cold when it's small, it will bolt later in the season and otherwise won't. But later in the season, it can also be out in the cold. So I don't know I'm not sure whether you can just keep it in the greenhouse. It's a good question. Best time to plant onions and green onions. So there's two options for your regular onions. Is if you were planting onions by seed, you should have it done back in February. So it is too late to plant onions from seed, but a lot of people do onions from bulbs instead. Honestly, I don't, but I'm going to go with 90% sure that you can put your onion bulbs in the ground right now. If you did put your onions in by seed, you could be putting your onions out in the ground right now as well from seed, your onion transplants at this point. Green onions are basically the same. I believe you can plant them as seeds in your greenhouse in March. They take quite as long, but you can still plant your green onions now. And often green onions are bunching onions that will overwinter, so they bulb up. So that's a bit of a perennial thing. Don't take up all of your green onions. Yeah, someone saying that they might try to transplant some carrots. They do like spiral out. If you do it really carefully and don't disturb the root whatsoever, then maybe. But I would honestly just direct seed your carrots, and you still have time. We at the farm we plan to direct seed our carrots probably the first week of June. They take about 21 days to germinate. And yeah, so early June is plenty of time to direct seed your carrots. I wouldn't worry about what's in your egg cartons right now. How soon can your tomatoes and cucumbers be out on your deck if they're going in a pop-up greenhouse? Overnight. Don't put them out until after the last frost. You can watch it night to night. Some nights there now we're seeing that it's staying. We had a night last week that it was like 8 degrees overnight. You could have probably left them out that night, but not. I think Monday night we had frost, so it'd be something that you'd have to watch the weather very closely and be taking them in again. I expect last frost to be the first full moon in June. Some people will tell you Father's Day. Who knows? No one. So even after, I guess that's the point to take away from that. Even after we think that the last frost is done, then you still need to watch these things as best you can. Turn on a light. I'm just realizing I'm really dark. Ooh. Okay. I guess so. I was hoping for. Can you just turn on the regular light? Got really here earlier with the windows, the blinds open, and just as the sun's going down, I'm realizing how dark I must look. So trying to turn up the lights. Okay, so I've lost where I stopped answering questions, so maybe I will go back to the PowerPoint for just a little longer. We are in the last, I believe, 5 slides or so of the PowerPoint, so we'll get back to questions, I promise. Some really good questions, and hopefully I get to everyone's, and hopefully I have the answers to everyone's. Like I said, not, a real expert, but I'm trying. This is the idealistic crop rotation, an 8-year crop rotation. So crops have families. So your nightshades, for example, are potatoes and tomato plants. They're the same family. And why that's important is because they take the same nutrients out of the ground to create the crop, and they're also attracting the same pests and diseases. So you don't want to plant your potatoes and tomatoes in the same ground year after year, whether that's like potatoes for 8 years straight or you're trying to do a crop rotation. You have to know that these are essentially the same as far as crop rotation. You're not going to go potatoes, tomato, potatoes, tomato. That would not be an effective crop rotation. However, I'm going to recognize that not everyone is planting all of these things. So even at the farm, we have a problem that, we don't have, our squash field is not the same size as our potato field. So trying to do this crop rotation doesn't even work for us, let alone someone with a smaller garden or even just a raised bed. In a raised bed where you are going to plant everything every year, the best you can do is to recognize that you are taking nutrients out of the soil. So again, recommending the webinar that we already have up from Tom Loader about soil health. But you're going to be putting in, if you can do a cover crop over the fall and winter, which you would then turn into your soil, or add different manures and composts change the nutritions. Do soil samples. You can do soil samples with the Department of Agriculture out on Brookfield Road, and they'll tell you what your soil needs. And it is important to put in organic, healthy materials. So a lot of people will use chemical fertilizers, and that's okay. But eventually, you can't grow on just chemicals. Chemicals are a quick fix, but not a long-term fix. Your long-term fixes are your chicken manure that actually doesn't even fully develop into your soil and fully give out all of its nutrients for 3 years. If you put chicken manure in right now, it's there for the next 3 years. It's important to keep adding chicken manure so that every year it's getting more and more, but your chemical fertilizer is gone within months. So that's the dream of a crop rotation. The next slide, maybe more realistic. This is your four-year crop rotation, and this is recognizing 4 families of plants. If you are able to do it this way, it might be a little more realistic for you. Your brassicas are heavy feeders, so after that, you're going to add, before and after brassicas, you can add manure and compost, especially in order to feed them properly. But after brassicas, there is an order to these things as well. So your legumes, especially your peas, are actually putting nutrients into the soil. So that's why it comes after brassicas, because brassicas take so much out. The peas are actually going to put some back in. One thing I'm going to note here, we talked about companion plants. In the same family down there, we've got legumes and onions as a family, and they are in terms of what you're going to plant after brassicas or before potatoes. But legumes and onions are actually enemies. Don't plant peas with onions. Just try to keep those things separate. And it's a good idea to separate out similar plants anyway. If you have a raised bed, for example, you might put brassicas to either side of it instead of just grouping all of your brassicas to half, so that they're not competing against each other. Even if you're putting like broccoli in 4 corners of your raised bed, they're less competing against each other for the same nutrients. Yeah, so then you've got potatoes and other crops. That includes all of your, like I said, tomatoes are in the same family with potatoes, but also all of your fruits in that year's rotation. And then roots, not including potatoes. Some people group potatoes into roots, but potatoes are closer to a tomato than a carrot. And now, in case 4 years is still a little much, our next slide is 3 years. So these are boil it all down, and this is where we are gonna try to make a hard line about don't put brassicas in after brassicas. There's brassicas, everything else, and roots. So those are, if you can manage a 3-year plot rotation, then this is just a minimum. I should say I didn't create these slides. You can Google crop rotation and come up with a lot of options. And they're sometimes not all the same and very conflicting. I just found these to be truest to what I know and believe. So here you are for your minimum crop rotation if you're able to do a crop rotation. Okay. So I talked a smidge about garden planning websites. I started doing my garden plan on Excel and quickly found out that it was a lot for me to manage everything. So I did move over first to Farmer's Almanac, Garden Planner, and then Smart Gardener is what I currently use. Now, that said, I've since went back to Excel. because these garden websites are beautiful for beginners, but as you get more in depth and more picky, I guess you could say, about trying to do these intensive gardens, and we do intensive gardens at the farm. I actually, to go back to the zucchini and cabbage example, I am doing that. Our cabbages are in the ground right now, and they are going to be protected against frost. But they're in the ground that I intend to plant zucchini. So as you get into these intensive ideas, then it's a little harder to use these garden planning websites. But these are two that I have used and found them pretty good. Farmer's Almanac is a little more basic, but it is a little easier to use as well. So if you are just getting started, the nice thing about it is you can do free for 7 days. You don't even have to input your credit card information. 7 days should be plenty of time to plan a raised bed. And they do give you ideas about companion plants, and they've got lots of how-to videos up. So I would recommend it, especially free for 7 days. And like I said, the square foot gardening, though, on there, they recommend things for square foot gardens, and I don't trust their spacing on the square foot gardens. Smart Gardener does have more varieties than Farmer's Almanac. They do succession plans, so they actually, you input that you're trying to feed 4 adults and 3 children on this space of land, and you input these are the varieties of plants that you're putting in, and they actually recommend how many radishes you should be planting for that number of people, and when you should be planting them in terms of that succession plan. So that's a really nice feature of Smart Gardener. They come up even with a to-do journal, when to put compost into your soil, because you should be putting in like your compost or your lime some weeks before your garden is planted. So it comes up with a to-do journal, but it is $30 a year, which is not unreasonable. But like I said, Farmer's Almanac, seven free days is great. And I did intend to actually show you. Let's see. So this is, if it's going to load. I had it loaded up. Yeah, so this is the Farmer's Almanac Garden Planner, and you can see it has a lot of how-to videos. Let's give that a moment, and we'll skip over to Smart Gardener. And like I said, this is Smart Gardener, so this is the to-do list. It's telling me soil preparation, that I should be putting in a mix of soil in where I'm putting my beets. It's telling me that my carrots can go out 2 to 3 weeks before last frost date, and this is the succession plan. It's telling me I should plant 16 carrots at this time, and I will plant more carrots according to it now. Of course, I am going to plant a lot of carrots, but I think I put in that it was for, I don't know if I put in for 10 adults or something like that. So it'll tell me again to plant 16 carrots now and 16 carrots in 2 weeks' time in order to have a continuous supply of carrots. And it says the same thing. See that S there for my lettuce is telling me when to put in lettuce and how many to put in at a time. So one of the big things with succession plans, if you're not doing intensive gardening, make sure you're still leaving space for this. So if you are planning to put in 6 lettuce this week and 6 lettuce next week or what have you, you need to make sure that you're leaving space for that 6 lettuce at a later date. The nice thing with Smart Gardener, I think the highlight of it for me is actually trying to find varieties that you want. So you could type in just cabbage in terms of what seed that you're trying to order, and now you can look through a bunch of different varieties of cabbage here. I should be getting a commission from Smart Gardener right now, I'm sure of it, but I am not. They're not paying me to tell you about this. Neither is Farmer's Almanac. It's just trying to help you. Hopefully it helps. And you can even sort by days to maturity of these cabbages that we've brought up, so we can play with that as well. And then same as Farmer's Almanac, this is the, you can put in your buildings and everything. So this is my SketchUp of the community garden up off Legion Road, Gateway Garden. That's our raised beds and some of the plants. This isn't the real plan for what we're planting there, but just to give you an idea of what it might look like. And skipping back over to Farmer's Almanac to give you an idea. I think Farmer's Almanac does a better job of having a lot of tutorial videos. So this I don't have set up as well in terms of showing you a nice pretty grid, but it just has broccoli, so it doesn't have like a bunch of varieties of broccoli. But I can click info and it comes up with a lot of information here, including companion planting, spacing, some other notes, troubleshooting, what kind of pests you might see in it, or this image has bolted broccoli in it. So and you can even, if you select a plant, you can click this little heart, which means companion plants. So all of these plants that is coming up with next are companion plants for the pumpkin. So that's a nice feature. It also has if you click plant list, comes up with this great chart that you can take out to print off, take out to the garden with you, and you see that you're going to plant 32 arugula at 4 inches apart, and then the little things here says when you're going to sow it indoors or you're going to sow it outdoors, and when you can start harvesting. So that's a nice little feature of Farmer's Almanac. Smart Gardener has that as well to an extent, but maybe not as quite a nice out of a printout. One other website I had brought up, you're gonna laugh at me now. I give you full permission to laugh at me. Oh my goodness, I'm getting reminded of the time. Okay, I'll skip to questions, but Wikipedia is the largest, most comprehensive list of companion plants that I have found. And so you have all of their names. So this is the onion family, and then like what it's helped by, what it helps, what it repels, and it's a huge list, and it's Wikipedia. And yeah, there you go. Go to Wikipedia. Okay. So where is my mouse? Okay. So just the contact information for both the CBS Community Garden and myself at the farm. You'll get me either way, to be honest, but we do have a huge steering, well, not huge, but we have a very good steering committee with a lot of energy for the community garden, and a lot of experts for different things on that steering committee. So reach out to us or reach out to me more directly through the farm for any questions that you have beyond what we're doing here. I know that we're at 8:23. I can't believe it that I talked this whole time. Let's see some questions. So, avoiding cutworms. If you have cutworms, the biggest, I mean, you can give your plants a little necklace of a little plastic around it, and cut like a little bit of plastic and put a ring around it so that they don't actually climb up and cut off your plant. You can also, when you do find it, dig down into your soil to find the cutworm and destroy it. The other thing is to create healthy soil. So if your soil is healthy, then you have predatory insects in your soil that are going to eat the cutworm eggs and larvae before they become a problem, or at least minimize the problem. So work on your soil, which means manure and compost teas are really good quick fixes for things like that. And some things you can save, so some things will root as well if you are in a situation where it's like your only plant left of that variety. You can try to put it in some water and try to get it to root again. Can you tell us a little bit about garlic, when to harvest scapes versus bulbs, how to dry? So garlic, scapes, they are the like little wiry spindly thing that comes up. They're not a leaf. You can actually eat garlic leaves, by the way, but it's not why we grow garlic. If you're eating the leaves, you're kind of damaging the bulb to a certain extent. But I don't know what to call it. It looks like a pipe cleaner that comes up and it swirls around once and then twice before going whip straight, and then it'll have a flower, which is where you get garlic seed if you want to try. Well, actually, garlic umbels to be totally correct about it. You're going to harvest your scapes sometime between the first turn and the second turn. If they're turning twice, then you're really like cutting it close. Once it turns once and or starts to turn the second time, do that. How to dry, you really want to put it out as on a grid of some sort so that it has airflow around it, not get it wet. So if it don't leave it out in the rain. I'm trying to skip through if there's any questions. Pansies between veggies. Yeah, I can't see why not to plant pansies. They're great little pollinator attractors. Question on starting seeds. There is a whole webinar on that. So there's so much information about starting seeds, and the webinar is already up for that one. So I'm sorry, I'm going to skip over you. Transplant savory started from seed? Absolutely. Cayenne pepper for cats, yeah. Cats don't like strong smells usually, but then there's always a little quote I saw the other day that there is no normal cat, or no, what was it? Anyway, something to that effect. Cats are all different creatures. I wouldn't be surprised to find a cat licking cayenne pepper. Looking at your website, some things are already sold out. Will there be more? Possibly. Sometimes I hold back some things, so I want to make sure that that I have enough for everyone that has pre-ordered in case some things fail to thrive. So some more will be released closer to the date when all the orders are picked up. Something to deter rabbits. I believe garlic and onion deters rabbits. Are tea bags good for fertilizing your soil? You take the actual tea bag away, but what's in it is good. Too much of it might be too acidic over time, but you can add lime as well. Just get your soil tested. Infestation of carpenters eating strawberries. Yeah, so I went over this. I had the exact same problem. So it's not that the turnip itself is, they just go for the turnip. So you're sacrificing your turnip or your rutabaga for your carpenters over your strawberries. They just prefer it. You can do this with a lot of table scraps actually for carpenters. They just prefer dead material over fresh. So start putting your compost out for the carpenters. And you can trap them that way, so you're going to clean them out and move your carpenters out of your strawberry bed in this way, and then replace your turnips with fresh or fresher turnips for the next generation of carpenters. Can beet seeds go out now? I don't think beet seeds can go out yet. I'd give it 2 more weeks. Root maggots, back to healthy soil for root maggots. You really need to create a soil in which you have predatory insects that are eating your root maggots. You can also use row cover. So root maggots do come from a fly. So if the fly can't land, on your plant, then you're preventing the root maggots. And other than that, do a compost or a kelp tea, which is just putting your compost or tea or kelp in a mesh bag or like an onion bag down in a water in a probably warm place, and after a week to 2 weeks, using that water on your ground. Don't let the water get on your leaves. On a sunny day, you'll burn your leaves. Depending on how strong your tea is, you might even water it down some. And if it smells bad, like actually rotten, not just like you would expect a little bit of compost to smell, then don't use it. You need healthy tea, if that can make sense at all. I know it's kind of contradictory to say. Paintbrush for pollinating, yeah, I've done that for especially things in the greenhouse. I don't worry too hard about what's outside. But if you have peppers, tomatoes, or eggplants, for example, or tomatillos in your greenhouse, then you should, I believe anyway. I've heard some people argue over this, but I would be pollinating them with a paintbrush. We use a toothbrush, to be honest, but yeah, same idea. Broccoli always bolts. A lot of people just wait too long, so you might be using a variety that doesn't have a large crown, and you're waiting for it to be a large crown, and not harvesting it in time. That might be a reason. Other things might be that it's just been hot summers, not enough water, too much stress in some way, so you might have planted it too intensively with other broccoli or other things in some way. So it didn't have the space or the nutrients that it required. It could be soil health. So if your soil is poor, that's a stressor. Your broccoli will bolt. It's a plant's prerogative to make seeds. That's its purpose in life, is to make seeds. So if it thinks it's going to die soon because it's stressed, it's going to bolt. You could also be planting it. If it is a heat problem, you might plant it a little later in order to have fall broccoli instead of summer broccoli. Goodness. What type of manure? All manures are good. Variety of manure is good. Is kelp good? We put in kelp all of the time. Whenever we have kelp, we put in kelp. Don't plant carrots or parsnip where you are putting kelp, because they just kind of spider out the same way they do if you try to transplant them. But we do put kelp under our potatoes, for example, when we are planting them. Also, if you're using like a tractor or a hand tractor, it can get turned around in the tractor, so you want to be putting the kelp in like at the last moment, so you're not turning up your soil a bunch after you add your kelp. Can I direct sow my muslin, mustard, spinach, and chard? Direct sow. Yeah, no, you can direct sow those things right now. 100% do it. Minimum height. I've seen like 6 inches for a minimum height, I think, for a raised bed. I would go deeper. One thing with height is, especially if you can get a nice, say, I'm gonna say 3 foot bed in there, you could maybe put in mulch at the bottom of it, like a nice wood chip mulch that would compost over time and add to your soil health. So you don't need to be actually adding all of your soil in there. Yeah, sorry to skip back to the manure question. Composted manure is best rather than fresh. So if you do have access to manure, mix it in with your regular compost or some soil and let it sit a few years. That is the best manure. Can we grow asparagus on the Avalon? The government actually has an asparagus program right now, so our government thinks we can. I've seen it in raised beds locally. I did not do so well with it myself, but probably didn't pay enough attention to it. So by all means, try growing asparagus. It does take some years and some effort, but well worth it. I love asparagus. If you could plant one flower, garlic. I know that's not a flower, but if I have to choose one plant to ward off most pests, it's garlic, and garlic will flower for you as well, so it kind of counts. Basil tips. So the biggest, basil is so tricky. So first, same thing with peppers. You're going to top them. So that's why I'm going to create a blog post so I can really show you about what I mean by topping. But you're taking the 2 leaves right on off, so it becomes 4 leaves instead and grows out into 2 branches. So that's how to make out your basil bushy. And you could do the same thing on those branches too, for them to go out separate. Basil likes the heat, but it doesn't like the sun, so it needs to be hot but in the shade. Basil likes the humidity, but it doesn't like wet soil, so you need to not water it too much, but put a plastic dome over the top, and this helps with the heat as well. And then mist the dome, because if you mist the plant, the basil leaves will get burned in the sun. And yeah, I guess that's the biggest things with basil is trying to find that balance between heat and shade and moisture and dry soil. So that's the tricks with basil. I'm at 8:40 there now, so I think I'm nearing the end of the questions though, so I'm just going to keep going. Thank you all for joining me, by the way. I hope you do check out the CBS Community Garden Network on Facebook. You can ask your questions there and have conversations with each other as well as all of us. We've got some more experts in our steering committee as well as just around the community, lots of growers in CBS and greater area too. So ask your questions there, answer each other's questions. We're all here for each other, and I'm not going to pretend that I have all of the answers or that my answers are always right. So discussions are ideal. Using row cover over strawberries. We use chicken wire on our strawberries just for the birds. I don't see why I would use row cover otherwise for strawberries, but like I said, discussions are great. Mother used a scooped up half grapefruit to collect carpenters in their unfinished basement. Yeah, exactly. They just eat dead things. So your compost, they're going to eat your compost over your growing strawberries or what have you. Planting squash or zucchini in a container, don't have enough space in your raised bed. Certain varieties. You're looking for bush varieties, most likely. So as far as I know, all zucchini. You still do want a fairly sizable container, ideally a 2-foot square container for your zucchini. You can probably get away with a foot per plant. Squash, I'm sure there's some examples out there of people doing it. I would choose smaller squashes, such as an acorn squash over, say, a spaghetti or a pumpkin, but zucchini for sure can be in a container, 100%. The little plantable pots are like jiffy pots, you mean, directly into the soil? I've never really used them. I've seen good results on Facebook, and I've seen bad ones of it not working out. I'm not sure. Sorry, I guess I don't really have an answer for that. Direct sow kale or start inside. We do start our kale inside for the idea of the weeds. You can direct sow kale, but the idea that your kale is this big when it's transplanted and the weeds around it are small, so you can tell the difference between it, versus if you're direct sowing, you need to be able to tell the difference between your kale and the weeds, and that whether you know that your kale actually survived and the seed turned into a plant. It helps to transplant for that reason alone. Does sawdust help the soil? I've seen a lot of debate on that. I'm on the side of yes, not too much of it, but yes. Keeping your basil in your pop-up greenhouse, meaning outside. Lower shelves. Yeah, I could see that working. Just keep misting it and give it lots of heat. So it'd be too early yet for basil. Basil is definitely still going to be inside. We always keep it in the greenhouse. Some people do put it in the ground outside, but it's just going to be a short season. I would keep your basil in a container so that you can move it when the time comes. Anyway, so I've actually reached the end of your questions for tonight, and we've gone over only by 10 or 11 minutes, so that's not too bad. Yeah, thanks so much for joining me, everyone. Join us on Facebook. Join the next webinar on pests and beneficials next month. And keep watching us. Keep watching the community garden on Facebook for all kinds of events. I know that we'll have many more come up. We've got so much energy, and if you are, like I said, looking at starting a neighborhood garden, if you want to get 6 beds in at the end of your cul-de-sac, then reach out. We've got the resources for you. And otherwise, join me at the farm for seedlings and seed potatoes on pre-order right now, and later on we'll have produce for you also on the website. Yeah, okay. Thanks so much. Oh, best webinar I've taken in a while. Thanks so much. I'm so glad. All right. I'm logging off, and I'm going to drink lots of water now so I have a voice tomorrow. Good night, everyone.